I live in the Brainerd area. I'm just off of Tally Road on a little bitty road called Bella Vista Avenue. I've lived in Chattanooga my whole life, but I've also lived in other places as well. I went off to school and to Chicago and in Knoxville, so I've experienced those places as well. But I've lived here, born and raised here my whole life. When I came back from Chicago, in 2010, and I started noticing there were houses that what they call brownstones in Chicago. They were starting to build those houses on MLK by Olivet Baptist Church, and then they were starting to build some more of those over on Main Street. That was like the first wave of really, I would say, cleaning up Main Street and just refocusing their efforts on bringing people in who were going to live downtown and who were going to be involved in businesses. And that was the first wave of really construction going on downtown, was in early 2010. Brainerd has pretty much stayed the same, but where I noticed the hugest change for me, I would go to my aunt's house and my grandfather's house on every Saturday, and they still do, in Highland Park. And so that has been the biggest change for me, because now when I go over there, I see the houses that have the great big columns, and those houses were always there, but they were rental properties before, and now they are being converted into condominiums. They are being used to pull in kind of the 400,000 and up range income brackets.
Well, everybody keeps telling us how much it's changed over the past, say, 20 years or so. So I'm sure we haven't seen in our time here the biggest changes. But the neighborhood definitely has changed a lot. The general feeling in the neighborhood is that we need to continue to have housing that's affordable for other people too, and not just for those of us who could pay $200,000 for a house. In my opinion, it's less stratified than it was. As I only have a year and a half of ability to look at it, but in the time we've been here, it seems to me that stratification has decreased rather than increased. But it could hardly have gotten any more segregated than it was. You could draw lines around the parts of the neighborhood that were majority African American and majority Hispanic and majority white, and I think that's a lot less than it was. This is the only place that I can think of outside of New York City, which was a long time ago in my life, where Norty and I, especially together, have African American friends. Not just people we have passing contact with, but if we go over to the park, Norty's chess partner is African American. Our dentist is African American. We have, this is a very comfortable place to be around people who don't look just like me. And I just think that's something. When we have neighborhood events in the park, everybody comes. I know that there are some people who think that when you do something like that, you just get all the white people there. And I will say that when we first started going to neighborhood association meetings, they were almost entirely white. But that's changed. We are really starting to see an increase in the attendance of other people in the neighborhood. I think they've stopped being quite so suspicious once they realized that we weren't trying to force them all out of the neighborhood, and they're starting to buy into this is their neighborhood too.
So do you think that overall, gentrification is a positive thing for Chattanooga?
I think gentrification can be positive. It can be positive because it stimulates growth. There's always new people, new faces coming in. But the downside is that it creates a situation where people are displaced. So that's the downside, where people who resided in those areas before, they will have a hard. It is a positive thing, but it has negative consequences also. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge is, how do we maintain the positive aspects and kind of diminish some of those negative aspects? How do we bring the people that were displaced, how do we bring them into the fold? Mm-hmm. That's always the challenge with gentrification.
I really wish they could think of a different word, because in the minds of many people it's become such a pejorative. And I don't happen to see it that way. But the idea of gentry is, the upper class people coming in and pushing out all of the undesirables there. I don't like that image. But I think neighborhoods change. This neighborhood, for instance, to give you some history of it, this was originally a really upper class, very rich people neighborhood when it was first built. It was one of the first upscale housing areas. And these houses, this was where the richest people in town lived, in these big old houses. And then that all started to change, and then for a while it was a neighborhood that, as you say, students were warned that they should not go there. A lot of people were warned that they should not go there. I have friends who wonder, why the heck do you live there? Isn't that place this dreadful, crime-ridden? It still has a little image problem there. But I can't give you a definition of gentrification that makes me happy. Because I think that covers, there's too many different ways that it happens, and there are too many different ways to approach it, and upsides and downsides to it, and I guess I decline to try to give you a definition.
North Shore, I went to school at the Performing Arts Magnet School, and then before it turned all performing arts, but it was kind of like a school within a school. I've seen so many things happening in North Chattanooga. They've got the boutiques now, and none of that stuff was there when I was there. They've got a surge of like little restaurants and things like that. Again, none of these things are negative in that respect, where it's bringing business and you've got different types of things to offer. That's not the issue, but the issue is, are you doing this to purposely exclude other groups, other citizens of Chattanooga?
I'm a professor in the English department, and I teach creative writing, and I also teach in the Honors College. I teach the freshman Brock Scholars Western Humanities class. Before this book came out, I've had 3 novels come out, and this book is called Immigration Essays, which is essays, which is nonfiction. So this is my first book of nonfiction that's coming out, and it's coming out in February, and it's about immigration, gentrification, race, and refugees. When I moved here in 2007, and I write about this a little bit, we bought a house in the MLK neighborhood, and that neighborhood, actually, there's a lot that's going to be happening there, but if you still go over there, we were just by our old house the other day, and there's not a lot that's changed. Some things like the Douglas Heights apartments, and the property's being bought up, and the property prices are going up. But that's in anticipation, I think, of a lot of building that hasn't quite happened yet. What's changed a lot, obviously, would be the South Side and the kind of downtown. A lot of things have changed. It seems like there's a lot more people moving to Chattanooga that aren't from Chattanooga. I think it's not so much what I see, but just looking at the statistics. So MLK, the neighborhood that I lived in, and South Side have 2 of the fastest gentrifying zip codes in the country, which means that, especially the South Side, the demographic has changed the fastest of almost anywhere, and you can see that. MLK is also changing. Is also changing the zip code, the demographics. So sometimes it's hard to see that on a day-to-day because it doesn't happen overnight. But when you're looking at the numbers, you can see that. So I would say that's a big change.
We don't know what it's going to look like, and I think that's the scariest part of gentrification, is that you don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know if you're going to be affected, and that's always the agonizing part about it, is that you just don't know. You don't know if I'm going to have to move across the town. Well, if I work over here and I'm work close to where I live, and if I have to move somewhere because I can't afford to pay the escalating rents, then how is that? I've got to have transportation. How is that going to affect me? The amount of time I get to work. I mean, there are a lot of things that go into it that, of course, the business end, the business people are only thinking of that bottom line, so they're the numbers crunchers. They're only thinking about profit margins and things like that. So they're profit oriented and not people oriented.